I was just finishing up the evening preparations when I heard Henrik's voice. "Sarah, can you help me?" At first I didn't think much of it. He usually manages on his own, but there was something a little off about his tone. Curious, I went upstairs to his room and found him standing in front of the mirror, fastening his belt. He was frowning, holding his trousers in one hand and fiddling with the belt in the other. "What's wrong, Henry?" I asked, standing in the doorway and watching him. "My belt is stuck, damn it, I'm trying to fix it, but it's stuck, and now it's time to go to that damn party." He looked at me, a little frustrated. I hesitated, but then went in. "Let me try." "Wait." I held out my hand. He handed me the belt. I grabbed the buckle and tried to undo it. Sometimes these things are simple, just a little tug, but as I said, the buckle came undone and his trousers slipped down at once. For a moment we were both frozen, my eyes drifting downwards involuntarily, but I quickly looked away. Henry's face was beet red, and he was trying hard not to look away. Sorry," I quickly covered my mouth with my hand. "I don't think we managed to keep our trousers on," he said half-jokingly. The room suddenly became deathly silent. I took a few steps back, not knowing what to do, but my heart was pounding for a few seconds. The silence was unbearable. Henry's face was still red, and his eyes were fixed on the floor. I turned around, not knowing what to say. I think you need to find another belt." I heard my own voice trembling and mumbling. Henry quickly pulled up his trousers and threw the belt aside. "Well, it's no big deal. I'll think of something." But his voice was both embarrassed and nervous, not knowing what to do. I turned towards the door, my heart racing and my palms sweating. "Getting dressed in the room, now M.O." I said, closing the door and rushing out of the room. I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. What was I doing? How could this have happened? I whispered to myself. I couldn't suppress the heat in my face, and my hands were still shaking. I tried to retouch my makeup in front of the mirror, but my hands couldn't keep still. Whenever I thought about Henry's expression, my heart started pounding again. It was just an accident, just an unfortunate moment. I flinched when I heard Chris's voice coming through the door. "Sarah, are you ready? We're going to be late," he shouted. "I'm coming." I tried to keep my voice normal, took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. Tonight I have to act as if nothing has happened. When I go downstairs, Henry is already ready. He has found a new belt and is tying his tie. Our eyes meet briefly, but he quickly looks away. His expression clearly shows that he is trying to forget what has just happened. Chris has no idea what has happened. He picks up the keys with a smile and asks, "Are you guys ready?" I reply, making sure my voice sounds normal. Henry nodded quietly and walked to the door. Chris glanced at us, but didn't seem to notice anything. We got into the car and headed to the party. But my heart was still racing. Sitting next to Henry made it hard to breathe, but I had to act as if nothing had happened. Chris hummed a tune while driving. I looked out the window and tried not to notice Henry's figure in the corner of my eye. I wanted to forget what had happened, but deep down I knew it would be impossible to erase it from our memories. When we got back from the party, it was past midnight. Chris went straight to the bathroom, took a shower and went to bed. His life was always comfortable and predictable, but I felt like I couldn't sleep in the dim light of the bedroom. I sat in front of the mirror, removing my makeup, and fell into a state of contemplation. The turmoil within had not yet subsided. Chris was 51 years old, intelligent, kind and romantic. When we first met, I felt like my life was finally starting to get on track. My first marriage had been a nightmare, the lack of love, the insecurity, the disappointment in Chris, it all seemed like a distant memory. He was someone who gave me trust and love, and his first marriage was not much different from mine. After a bad divorce, finding each other was like a miracle. Henry is Chris. When he first met him, he was a 19-year-old university freshman. He was very shy and distant. He respected me, but I could tell he didn't know how to deal with his stepmother. When Chris and I got married, Henry had already gone to another city to study, but now he was a completely different person. He had graduated from university and returned home. The boy was gone, replaced by a confident, striking young man. He was tall, with sharp features and a lot of charisma. Sometimes I even felt he looked a bit like Chris, but Henry had a different kind of vitality, younger and livelier, even a bit dangerous. What happened today? Why does it make my heart race? A wave of guilt washes over me. It was only an accident, but why can't I stop thinking about the shocked expression on his face, or how flustered he looked when he pulled up his trousers, or why does it feel like something has changed when he looks at me, even if it's just for a second? When Chris comes out of the bathroom, he smiles at me as usual. "Baby, you look tired. That party really took it out of you," he says. He said, and I answered, avoiding his gaze as he went to bed. I remained sitting in front of the mirror, switched off the light, and lay down next to him, but closing my eyes didn't make the thoughts go away. How was I to know that when Henry came home, it wasn't just the house that would change, but my own equilibrium as well? Chris had gone to work, and the house was quiet. I was rearranging the living room, fluffing pillows and dusting the coffee table. While I was busy, I heard Henry's voice. "Sarah," he called my name. I turned around and saw him standing in the living room doorway. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, but there was a strange expression on his face, a little nervous, a little guilty. "Yes, Henry," I turned around, holding a rag in my hand. He took a step forward, with his hands in his pockets. I wanted to apologize." I raised an eyebrow, apologizing for the trousers. He looked down at the floor, really strangely. "I've put you in an awkward situation." I didn't realize it was that awkward. I waved my hand in the air. "Don't worry, Henry, I've already forgotten about it." But he didn't seem to have forgotten. He paused for a second, and a strange smile appeared on his face. "I'm going to start wearing boxers," he said, trying to laugh it off. I couldn't help smiling, but his tone made me uneasy. He seemed to want to say something more than just an apology. "That's a good idea," I responded to his smile, but I felt uneasy inside. This conversation had dragged on for far too long. Just then, the doorbell rang. I felt relieved. I thought someone was here. I walked quickly to the door, opened it and found Angela standing there. Chris's sister Angela was dressed in her usual exaggerated white jacket and black trousers from Lens, with bright red lipstick and a sharp, cutting look in her eyes, which immediately scanned me. "Come here, darling," she said, blowing me a kiss, but behind this false warmth lurked interrogation. "Angela, come in." I said this while stepping aside, feeling nervous. Angela came in and immediately scanned the room. Her gaze fell first on Henry, then turned to me. "Henry," she said, with a slight smile. "You've grown up." Henry looked a little surprised and said, "Thanks, Angela. How have you been?" A smile appeared on Angela's face. "Oh, I'm fine, but you've changed a lot since we last met. How do you like the house?" Henry shrugged and replied that it was fine. Angela's gaze turned to me again, and she thought about making some coffee. "Sarah, I think we need to talk." My inner unease grew stronger, but I nodded, sure that I would do it. My heart raced as I made the coffee in the kitchen. Angela's arrival always made me feel like I was being put to the test. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and missed no detail. When I took the coffee tray back into the living room, Angela and Henry were sitting quietly, looking at each other. After taking a sip of coffee, Angela turned to me and asked how Chris was. "He's doing well," I said. "Work is busy but happy," Angela nodded, but I felt her eyes like to pierce me. "How's life here? Is everything okay?" I carefully weighed the wording and said, "Yes, everything is fine." "Very well." She leans back in her chair. "Henry's return must be interesting. A young man coming home can sometimes upset the balance, don't you think?" Her words make my body tense, but I keep my expression calm. "Henry is always a very good guest." Angela's mouth curls into a smile. He certainly is. Chris. The son. After all, we've been chatting and drinking coffee, talking about trivial things. But every word Angela says is scrutinized, every glance is questioning. Finally she stood up, put her bag over her shoulder and gave me one last look. It was nice chatting with you, Sarah. I hope everything goes according to plan. She said this as she walked towards the door. Goodbye, Angela, I said. As I watched her leave, I closed the door and went back into the living room. Henry was still there, but the cheerful, apologetic man from earlier was gone, replaced by someone else. Angela was as impressive as ever, he said, but his voice carried a serious tone. Her eyes are always open. She sees and notices everything, I replied. A shadow passed over Henry's face. Yes, I noticed a few nights ago when I was home alone. Chris had gone away on business and wouldn't be back for a while. I wanted to take advantage of the quiet time and be alone, watching my favorite romantic movies, which always made me feel better, so that's what I decided to do in the evenings before the movie started. When darkness fell and I lay on the sofa, alone in the room, it gave me a strange sense of peace. But when the film started, my heart almost skipped a beat as a super romantic and passionate scene flashed across the screen, and my eyes were lost in the intimacy and loving moments between the couple. After a while, the door to the room creaked open, and I jumped when I heard Henry's voice. The voice of Sarah. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he asked. I turned my head and saw him walk in and casually head for the corner of the sofa. Henry looked much calmer than before and his smile was more relaxed. No, of course not, I answered hesitantly. But something inside me was uneasy. Henry moved closer and sat down next to me on the sofa. The room was quiet for a while, only the romantic music from the screen echoing in the air. My eyes were glued to the passionate interaction between the protagonists in the film, but Henry's presence next to me became more and more obvious. His breathing, our closer sitting position changing the air around us, we sat there quietly watching for a while, but my heart beat faster and faster. I looked away and looked at Henry, who was absorbed in the film, but I noticed that the distance between us was getting smaller and smaller. Everyone seems to be able to watch the film, but I felt a little strange inside. I thought about the incident with my trousers falling down a moment ago, and I went back over every detail of that strange moment in my mind, the belt breaking, the trousers falling, reliving the sensation, but now Henry was sitting next to me, and this situation made my heart race. In just a few seconds, the distance between Henry and me had grown smaller and smaller, and we were leaning so close together that there was barely any space between our bodies. My eyes returned to the screen, but nothing matters anymore. That strange moment keeps echoing in my head is spinning, my thoughts are in a complete mess. I don't know what to do. I just want to figure out what's going on. He leans in closer to me, his voice dropping a little. Sarah, he says, his tone more serious. I just want to be with you, I'm not thinking about anything else. His words only serve to make my inner turmoil worse. Of course, Henry, I say, there's no problem, but my voice is shaking. I feel something wrong. I felt both excited and scared. At that moment, Henry's fingers moved closer to my arm than before. Time seemed to stand still, while the passionate scene on the screen continued. I tried to understand my inner feelings. I could feel my whole body trembling, and the air was filled with tension. For a moment, everything was like a movie, but also real. How should I deal with all this? Henry's closeness made me even more uneasy. The passionate scene on the screen suddenly became blurry. Henry's voice echoed in my ears. Sarah, he said, his tone distinctly different that day. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since. Those words hit me hard. I felt a strange warmth spreading through me, but at the same time, a cold shiver ran through my body. 100 different thoughts flashed through my mind. Henry, I said, my voice trembling. We can't do this. I turned to him, looked him straight in the eye, I took a deep breath. I'm your stepmother, I forced myself to say the words, no matter how much I wanted to, this is just too wrong, it can't happen. Henry's eyes welled with disappointment, but he just nodded without saying anything. I know what he said, but I will never forget that day. Sarah, I feel like I've become so different, I feel terrible, everything between us has become so chaotic and out of control, but it was time for me to stop. That moment was a one-off thing. Henry SC. I gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said, we both need to forget about it. He thought about it for a moment, then took a step back. His eyes were a little blurry, but he didn't say anything. We sat in silence for a while. The movie continued to play, but nothing made sense anymore. I wanted to get rid of the strange tension in that moment. My mind was still full of questions and unease. In the next few days, even if I couldn't, I tried to act normal and get through the week. But one evening Chris came home late and I still felt something was wrong. That unease didn't go away at the dinner table. Chris stared at me, and slowly, he turned his gaze to me and began to speak cautiously. Sarah, he said, pausing, is there something going on between you and Henry? My whole body went numb. Chris's question made my heart race. What do you mean? I stuttered, too flustered to answer properly. After a few seconds Chris looked at me, his gaze full of doubt. I had to ask him, I've noticed some strange things lately, it seems like something's going on between you two. My mind raced. I remembered the day Angela had visited and her sharp words. Everything seemed normal, Sarah, but you have to be careful. I can see clearly. About you. Angela's words echoed in my head. Had Angela put this idea into Chris's head? Chris, really, there's nothing between us, I said, my hands trembling on the table. It's just that sometimes I think too much, because Henry's back from school and everyone has to adjust, but really there's nothing going on. Chris stared at me for a moment, sizing me up with his eyes, but thankfully he just nodded and said, okay, but if there's anything, you let me know right away. At that moment, I felt a little relieved, but I still couldn't shake the unease. Angela's suspicions had entered Chris's mind so quickly, and that was a warning to me about how quickly things could change and how dangerous it could become. But I didn't want to make it bigger than it needed to be, so I tried to stay calm, but deep down I was terrified of how long this game would last. After a while, I decided to stick it out until Henry left the house. I really realized that I needed to stay calm and control my emotions, and telling Chris that everything was fine made me feel better, but the effects of what happened to Henry were still with me. However, I knew that I had to do the right thing and remain patient, and once Henry found a job and moved out, my sense of anxiety disappeared. I felt that I had made the right choice and calmly continued with my life. If you have read this far, I know that my story may have affected you. There is still a lot more to share, and you don't want to miss any of the exciting content. Please click the follow button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about this story. I would love to know what you think, so please leave a comment. Your support means a lot to me.